But a lot of times when I'm fishing these tournaments, I'll fish this drag so tight that if a fish really pulls, he's going to snap my line. Okay, but what I want to be able to do is when I set the hook, I don't want the drag to come out. Okay, so a lot of times when we're fishing, we're casting out. When we feel that fish hit and we set the hook, the drag's not going to go out. So we immediately flip the anti-reverse and back reel that fish, okay? And with that, you can be a lot more comfortable. You've got a good hook set. If the fish comes by the boat and you got a back reel, you just back reel your way around. The other thing we do a lot more of in open water fishing, which you can use on lakes like Lanier or out in the middle of Lake Murray here, is you want to take the boat to the fish, or basically control where the fish is at with the trolling motor. Okay, so big smallmouth on Lake Erie, a lot of times you're drifting or the boat's moving as soon as you set the hook, and you let off that trolling motor. So what I'll do is I will let the fish fight and basically take the boat to it. Okay, so what I'm trying to do is control where that fish is at with my trolling motor. So if I want to land the fish right here, I'll take the trolling motor over there and keep the fish in a certain spot. Basically, you're almost chasing the fish with the trolling motor. Okay? The other thing that you always want to make sure you remember is no matter where that fish is at, jumping wise or anything like that, you got to keep tension on your line and you got to keep the rod bent. Okay? So you don't want that fish to get any slack in it. Fishing around here, I use a Texas rig worm, kind of the simplest old system there is. I don't know if she just went out. But the Texas rig worm is just basically a slip sinker that you see that I have Texas rigged and pegged, okay? And then I'm using a light wire 1/0 Gamakatsu hook, okay, with that trick worm. The mistake that I see people make is you cast it out, you get a hit, and you hurry up and set the hook. One thing I can tell you, a lot of times when they grab a worm like this, it's just a soft lure. They've got it in their mouth. Let them swim off with it and make sure you get a good hook set. So reel down to it and set the hook right. Okay, a lot of times I can tell you, if I'm skipping underneath a dock or skipping around a brush pile, I'll let the fish swim out from the dock before I set the hook. It may sound crazy, we're fishing for all that money, and, you're letting that fish swim off, but you're getting him away from the heavy cover because you've only got light line. Most of the time I'm only using 8-pound gamma, okay, fluorocarbon line. So it's thinner line. You got to be careful if you're around docks or posts. You don't want that fish to be able to get wrapped around. So skip up underneath the dock, let the fish swim out, and then set the hook out here. Then you've got him out here where you want him, okay? Another thing I see people do, now, I'm pitching this bait underhand, okay? A lot of times you see people with a spinning rod, you're making a long cast out there, and you could be pretty accurate that way, but a lot of times I'll do the same thing as with a bait caster. I'll actually cast underhand, okay, and basically skip it up underneath those docks. So you're doing it just like a bait caster. You're shooting it out there, okay? Underneath docks, you can skip this bait, okay, so you can skip it up underneath that dock like that. A lot of times a skipped bait looks different to a bass than just a bass plumping into the water, so it looks like an injured bait fish. A lot of times when I skip that worm up underneath a pontoon or underneath a dock, by the time I lift up, there's already a fish on it, before it's even hit the bottom. And then again, let him swim his way out and then set the hook. Another big tip I can tell you, and I really never noticed it until I fished with other people in the back of the boat fishing with spinning rods, and I kept noticing they always had bird's nests. They'd cast out and they'd have a loop in their line, and I'm constantly untangling them, and I never noticed what I was doing. On these reels, okay, you'd never want to reel the reel to catch the line, okay? That's kind of a bad thing. Even though the reel's made to do that, you could spend your whole day without this bail, okay? So what you want to do when you cast out, no matter what you're doing, I don't care if you're bluegill fishing with a bobber, what you're doing, you cast the bait out, you stop it with your finger on the line, okay, like this, on the spool. You stop it and you turn the bail over And then when you go to reel, that first reel, that's the most important reel there is right there, you want to tighten up on the line, okay? Lift your rod tip and tighten it. The deal is you never want tight line on top of loose line, okay? Because tight line on top of loose line means you're going to get a bird's nest on the next cast, okay? So again, when you cast, now this isn't my reel, so I'm not as used to it, but you cast out, stop the bait with your finger, grab it, and lay the reel over like that. And then basically you're laying it on that roller. And if you can't get tightness to the line, I even lay my finger down and drag it across to tighten that line up every time. Okay? An old guy that I used to fish with, he's 70-some years old now, he would take every brand new reel, $150 reel, and cut the bail off of it, just so that you never, ever use that bail to close it, okay? The problem with that is the reels are balanced with that weight, so it's terrible. So I never did that. I'd never do a $300 reel and cut the bail off. But if you learn to do that, you'll notice you'll never, ever get a bird's nest. Fluorocarbon is a stiff line, okay, and it's kinky, so it makes it tough to cast, and that's the biggest reason people don't do it, is because they turn that reel over the other way. So one big tip. The other thing that we're doing more and more these days is using braid to fluorocarbon. Okay, it almost spoils you. Okay, because you can cast so far. You don't have to worry about that as much. I still grab it with my finger. You can set the hook way out there. The danger to fluorocarbon and a braided lead, a braided line to fluorocarbon that I don't like is it's easier for the fish to get unhooked, to me. That little bit of stretch that you have in the line is your shock absorber. Okay, so when that fish turns to where the line is pulling in line with the hook, okay, so the fish turns and the line's in line with the hook, and he pulls real hard, he pops that barb right out. Okay, so it's a give and take thing. You're going to lose more fish with braided line. Okay, but you can adjust for that by giving the rod more tip, okay, and giving that shock absorber in the rod. If you ever notice fly fishermen, okay, which I grew up doing a lot of fly fishing as a kid, okay, we're using little baby hooks, size 12 hook, and I'm landing a trout that's this big, a steelhead, a king salmon that's 30 pounds. Well, guess what? He never gets away because I've got a 9-foot rod, okay, and real stretchy line, and the fish can't get away because it's never getting loose. It's never pulling it out of his hook, out of his mouth, okay? So those are just little things that, that I've learned over the years. Drop shotting, we do a lot of drop shotting up on Lake Erie. I use a very soft rod. Because I'm using fluorocarbon or braid, the rod is very whippy, okay? And people have kind of got away from that. The first drop shot rods that ever came out were noodles, okay? And now all of a sudden you see drop shot rods that are stiffer. You got to remember that the reason for that is that small hook, okay? And if you hook them right on a drop shot, you'll never lose the fish, Let him play, back reel the fish. He isn't getting away. That little hook's going to hold him really, really well. I mean, I've watched 5- and 6-pound smallmouth jump 10 times around my boat. And as long as you stay calm, back reel, don't let him snap the line or get it on the trolling motor or something like that. If you stay calm, you're going to catch that fish, and do that trick that I said, try to follow him with the trolling motor. Put him in the position. The guys that I see, the fish go underneath the boat and run around and jumping on the backside of the boat, that's a mistake, okay? You don't want that to ever happen. If that fish is coming to the boat, you want to be backing up and getting away from him and keeping him fighting out here where he needs to be fighting. So I'll show you one more tip that I do. I'll tell you this little trick worm, a great bait around docks. The other thing that we do a lot, of course, is Senkos. Lots of guys are throwing Senkos and letting them float underneath docks. It's a great idea. One thing that I've done different than a lot of people over the years, there I get a phone call at the same time, and it's kind of a funny thing. You guys all remember the Banjo Minnow you saw on TV. Everybody laughed about it and how funny it was and who would buy the Banjo Minnow. Well, listen, after I got schooled one time by a little bank fisherman sitting right beside me in a pretty big tournament, and he was catching them on that Banjo Minnow, I said, there must be something to be said about that. So I kind of made my own little Banjo Minnow. And basically you can do it with a fluke, okay, because that's similar to the Banjo Minnow. It wasn't the bait. It was the way the hook was in the bait, okay? And all they were using a junk hook, okay, and a little corkscrew in the nose of it, and putting that little hook in there, but the guy caught the fish every time. It didn't matter what rod he had. I was amazed, So I kind of did the same thing with a fluke, and I know a lot of people that fish around here fish for schooling bass, okay? And everybody puts a Texas rig fluke on there and sets the hook as hard as they can, and, sometimes gets them, sometimes they don't get them, right? Because the fish is slashing at the bait. Well, I'll tell you this, that the Banjo Minnow rig like that, with that fluke, what I've done is taken a regular old fluke, put a corkscrew in the nose, and I weighted the fluke a little. This is a Super Fluke Junior, okay? But I can tell you, when a bass grabs this, okay, he's already hooked. You see how I grab my hand like that? Okay, that fish is already hooked. So when he slashes at it, you don't need to rear back and set the hook. You don't need to do anything but just start reeling. Put tension on that bait. And that bait looks very good in the water, which I'll cast it out, try not to snag this liner that's in here. But you see how natural the bait looks because there's no hook in it, okay? So you could sit there and twitch it, let it sink, do whatever you want to do. I don't really want to let it touch the bottom. But it's a big tip that, like, when I go out to Beaver Lake and it's tough and there are bass schooling, or anywhere that I've ever had bass schooling, I can tell you that little rig right there will catch them. Every time a bass grabs it, he's already hooked with that open hook like that. And anytime I get a chance to use it, I use it. So that's about all I got for today. Anybody got any questions or anything like that? Or any questions on anything? Or if you guys want to see this, if you guys want to come up and look at it, you guys come up, I can show you my little rig. So I thank you all for coming out. Yep, thank you. My little Banjo Minnow. This old guy that caught so many fish in front of me. Okay.